They already know more about you than you think. And no, I'm not talking about social media or ordinary spies. There are eyes that never close, watching your every move, not to gossip, but to measure your strength, test your faith, and question why you're still standing. The question is, have you realized that not everything in your life is a coincidence? Or could there be an invisible pattern to events that you haven't yet deciphered? Every moment you thought you were alone, was someone actually watching? Could every injustice, every loss, and every victory have been recorded by agents operating on a level far beyond our comprehension? This video will open your eyes to a reality that may feel uncomfortable at first, but liberating in the end. You'll understand why certain battles seem tailor-made for you, and why, despite attempts to bring you down, nothing can erase the mark you carry. By watching until the end, you'll discover not only who's watching you, but also why this is a sign that you're chosen. You'll learn how to turn surveillance into an advantage, pain into purpose, and silence into power. What once seemed like persecution will reveal itself as a refining process, guided by God Himself to prepare you for something far greater. At first, everything seemed like mere coincidence. Fleeting glances, subtle comments, minor interferences. But in truth, there was constant monitoring, as if every step was recorded in an invisible book. The so-called high-level agents didn't care about your smile or appearance. They wanted to understand what fueled your strength when everything around you tried to break it. What they found was something rare. Someone who, instead of succumbing, turned blows into lessons and rejections into fuel to move forward. They expected to find fragility, submission, or discouragement. Instead, they witnessed a strategic and spiritually unshakable stance, as if every wound became a badge of experience. This isn't something taught in ordinary books. It's forged in practice, pain, and faith. Like David facing Goliath, the strength didn't come from armor, but from trust in the purpose God had set. There was no room for self-pity, only for learning and adaptation. Each betrayal planted a seed of discernment. It wasn't about distrusting everyone, but seeing the surrounding scene more clearly. It was as if the chosen one had developed a spiritual peripheral vision, capable of spotting intentions before they even surfaced. This is a rare gift, and those who possess it don't just survive, they grow stronger with every attack. And here's the kicker. Those watching began to realize they weren't dealing with prey, but with a living enigma. When the observers realized that watching from afar wasn't enough to grasp the essence of that strength, they drew closer. They wanted to feel it up close, perhaps find cracks. But the closer they got, the more they were confronted with something they couldn't explain with logic or systems. It was like trying to analyze the wind. You feel it, but you can't trap it. This undeniable presence left them without clear strategies to act. The chosen one's silent resistance created profound discomfort, as if their very existence was a reminder that not everything can be controlled. This rattled their egos and challenged tried and true surveillance methods. After all, how do you contain someone whose strength lies not in their hands, but in their spirit? At this point, it became clear that true power wasn't in noise, but in the invisible steadfastness they carried. And it was this realization that led to the next revelation. Understanding that the threat wasn't in the loudness of their voice or the number of allies, but in their ability to see what no one else could. Contrary to what many think, it wasn't boldness or direct confrontation that put them on the highest watch list. It was something far subtler and therefore more dangerous to those seeking control. While everyone followed predictable patterns, they moved outside ordinary logic. It was as if they had an invisible map, revealed by faith itself, showing shortcuts and dangers before they became visible to others. What truly frightened them was their ability to detect hidden patterns in chaos. Where most saw confusion, they saw structure. Where others reacted automatically, they paused, analyzed, and dismantled the game. It's like chess. It's not the pawn that stands out for being fast, but the one that sees 3 moves ahead. And in the spiritual realm, this perception is even more powerful, as it relies not just on logic, but on revelation. The most elaborate lies, the most disguised strategies, all were exposed under their watchful gaze. This wasn't paranoia, but a sensitivity honed by past battles. They'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended, so they didn't react with emotional outbursts but with calculated moves. Like a general who knows every trap, every false shortcut, and chooses the right moment to advance. To those watching, this was unsettling. After all, how do you manipulate someone who doesn't fall into traps? How do you control someone who anticipates the next move? There were no scripts for this kind of person. They dismantled narratives before they could even be told, challenging the entire structure built to control minds and hearts. And the most curious part, they did it without needing to prove anything to anyone. The irony is that the more they tried to categorize them, the more they slipped through common definitions. They weren't the loud rebel or the predictable submissive. Their stance broke the rules of the invisible game being played around them. And for systems that thrive on predictability, this is like a crack in the foundation. Sooner or later, everything collapses. But this strategic and silent stance wasn't born of pride. It was the result of a conscious choice to stay aligned with something far greater than themselves, and that, inevitably, would lead them to realize that their greatest strength lay in what couldn't be seen or measured. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one who shouts, but the one who stays silent while everyone else rages. That was the essence of the chosen one. They didn't seek the spotlight or need an audience to act. Their impact came from the clarity with which they saw things and the serenity they carried even in storms. This kind of stance disarms enemies because they don't know how to attack what doesn't react as expected. It wasn't a lack of courage, but the presence of wisdom. While many confuse power with noise, they understood that a precise move is worth more than 1,000 fiery speeches. It was like a lion in the savannah. It doesn't need to roar to be respected. Its mere presence, aware of its strength, is enough. This invisible threat was, to those watching, a puzzle that couldn't be solved. Their silence wasn't empty. It was loaded with meaning. A silence that, like Jesus before Pilate, communicated more than any defense. This self-control became an uncomfortable mirror for those who thrived on manipulation and intimidation. There was no way to seduce them with promises or intimidate them with threats. They had already learned that those who know their worth don't negotiate their peace. Upon realizing this, the observers began to feel something unusual: insecurity. Not because they posed violence or rebellion, but because their presence dismantled the logic of control. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you grip, the more it slips away. And this escape didn't come from running, but from impenetrability. This stance made it clear that the game wasn't just physical or mental, but deeply spiritual. They didn't need to prove physical strength because their real influence happened behind the scenes of the mind and heart. And that territory, when guarded by God, becomes untouchable to any attempt at invasion. And it was this invisible, indecipherable barrier that made them shift their focus to understanding why their systems failed against someone who seemed so harmless. What they didn't expect was that all their technology, methods, and cunning would prove useless against something so simple yet so rare: purity. Not the naive purity of someone unaware of evil, but the conscious purity of someone who has seen the worst and chosen not to be tainted. This internal frequency was like an invisible password no system could crack. Their surveillance mechanisms were calibrated to detect deviations, anger, ego, or manipulation. But what happens when none of that is present? The absence of shadows confused their readings. How do you read a blank page? How do you classify someone who doesn't fit predefined categories? That was their dilemma, and it made it clear that the battle wasn't just against actions, but against essences. Their purity didn't come from isolation, but from daily choices. They were in the world but not shaped by it. They walked through toxic environments but didn't absorb the poison. It's like a lotus flower, born in mud but blooming clean. This isn't magic. It's a decision that requires discipline, prayer, and above all, faith. And the most intriguing part, their presence alone dismantled masks. Those who faced them felt as if their own souls were exposed. This didn't happen because they pointed out flaws, but because their light revealed others' shadows. And for those who live by appearances, that feeling is unbearable. Unable to categorize them, the observers began to confront their own vulnerabilities. It was inevitable. Being near them was like standing before a mirror that showed not just the exterior, but the inner truth. That experience is uncomfortable, but also liberating for those who accept what they see. And so, little by little, they realized that the real challenge wasn't containing them, but trying to understand how someone with no visible connections could wield such silent influence. They were convinced they were just a small piece on the board, predictable, disposable, easily replaced. This simplistic view led them to make the most common mistake of any strategist, underestimating the opponent. The chosen one didn't react to others' moves like an obedient pawn, but like someone who understood the entire game board. They weren't playing to survive, they were playing to rewrite the rules. Every move they made was calculated, silent, and above all, intentional. While others rushed to impress, they knew that a hasty advance could expose vulnerabilities. They learned that in life, knowing where to step is more important than running. It's like a game of checkers. It's not speed that wins, but intelligent positioning. The turning point came when the observers realized they couldn't predict their actions. They didn't rely on fragile alliances or political favors to move. Their independence made them a real threat because no one could pull strings to control them. In the invisible world of strategies, this is more terrifying than any army. They didn't let themselves be shaped by external expectations, which unsettled those used to manipulating through vanity or ambition. If someone offered a title, they weren't impressed. If someone tried to entice them with promises, they smiled and stayed true to their path. This solidity was reminiscent of Daniel, who chose the lion's den over bowing to unjust decrees. Their independence didn't mean isolation, but freedom to serve without corruption. It was like a wind that can't be caged, blowing where it's needed, bringing change and freshness. This spiritual freedom is the ultimate nightmare for any system that thrives on control. And it was this freedom that allowed them to turn every attack into fuel for a greater purpose. The traps were set with precision, carefully planned betrayals, calculated rejections, losses designed to hit the most sensitive spot. But what was meant to destroy them became the foundation of something far stronger. The chosen one didn't deny the pain. They faced it, learned from it, and shaped it into strength. Each wound became invisible armor, not to harden the heart, but to protect it from falling into the same traps. They understood that resentment is a burden, and excess weight slows any journey. So they chose to surrender their pain to God and extract wisdom from it, just as Joseph turned his prison into a springboard to the palace. Rejection stopped being a sign of failure and became confirmation of direction. When a door closed, they saw it as divine redirection. This mindset turned what seemed like loss into training for something greater. With each blow, they became more resilient and more aware of their calling. This process didn't happen overnight. It was forged in silent nights of prayer, moments of forced silence, and decisions not to retaliate when they had every reason to. This discipline wasn't weakness, it was self-mastery, and self-mastery is a weapon few know how to wield. What their observers didn't understand was that every attempt at sabotage became raw material for their elevation. Like iron refined by fire, they emerged stronger from each attack. The pain meant to be their end became fuel for a purpose that could no longer be stopped. And it was this ability to turn falls into steps that set the stage for something even deeper. A silent revolution that would change everything around them. There were no raised flags or fiery speeches, yet something was shifting. Their strength wasn't shown in public confrontations, but in their refusal to be shaped by suffering. They didn't play the victim or use their scars to gain pity. Instead, they made pain a laboratory where faith was tested and expanded. Each attempt to break them brought a new level of clarity. They learned that resistance isn't stubbornness, but adaptation without losing essence. When life squeezed, they didn't bend. They reinvented themselves. Like a river finding new banks, they kept flowing even when the original path was blocked. This flexibility is what separates survivors from victors. Their resilience became an undeclared weapon. Those watching expected exhaustion or surrender, but saw the opposite: growth. This dismantled the logic of using pain as a control tool. After all, what's the point of tightening chains if they turn into bracelets of purpose? This way of living began to create a powerful side effect, inspiring others. People who saw them overcome storms without losing the light in their eyes began to believe they could too. For systems that control through fear, this was a real danger. Nothing is more threatening than someone who proves in practice that it's possible to win without corruption. They didn't advertise their resilience. They simply lived authentically. But authenticity is contagious. Without realizing it, they were sparking a silent revolution, a shift in mindset that didn't rely on charismatic leaders or organized movements, but on living examples. And when this influence began to disrupt hidden gears, it became clear that even the most fortified strategy rooms would never be the same. The change started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Without attending meetings or sending reports, their presence was already altering the course of decisions. Key players began hesitating before executing plans, as if sensing that they already knew. And indeed they did. Not through espionage, but through a perception from a source the observers couldn't understand. It was as if they received real-time updates from an invisible channel. This intuition wasn't based on guesses, but on revelations. Those who've experienced it know it's like having a map no one else can see, showing danger points before reaching them. This ability disrupted any preset plan. While others frantically sought information, they simply stayed attentive, connected to something greater than any data network. Their faith acted like an antenna, picking up what couldn't be tracked. This made it clear that it wasn't about human intelligence, but a spiritual alignment that surpassed all protocols. This ability made them an inevitable presence, even without being physically in discussions. People who had never spoken to them directly began questioning methods and reconsidering orders. It was as if the collective consciousness started shifting because of the frequency they carried. The strategists realized that traditional methods couldn't neutralize something like this. You can't silence what doesn't speak loudly or block what moves without relying on visible channels. This was a different kind of threat, an influence that worked through atmosphere, not imposition. And faced with this impossibility of control, they were left to try to uncover the source of this inaccessible wisdom. No matter how hard they tried to map their mind, it led to dead ends. There were no recorded books, formal training, or visible mentors to explain that clarity. What they knew didn't come from ordinary sources. It came from a place algorithms couldn't reach and archives couldn't record. It was revealed knowledge, not learned. This kind of wisdom is like the wind. You feel its effect but can't see its source. They searched for patterns but found only anomalies. They wanted to trace the origin of each decision, but it vanished like footprints in the sand, washed away by the tide. This frustrated them, as they were used to controlling everything they could measure. They didn't rely on public information or strategic reports. Their decisions seemed guided by something far deeper, as if they had access to a divine database. This connection with God gave them answers before questions were even asked. And when someone operates on that frequency, no tracking system works. This unpredictability was what most unsettled their observers. They could predict anyone's actions, except theirs. With every unexpected move, it became clear that this wasn't just intelligence, but a spiritual alignment that neutralized traps before they were set. For those who thrive on control, dealing with someone like this is like trying to catch light with your hands. With every attempt, it simply escapes and illuminates elsewhere. This mental and spiritual freedom was their greatest shield and at the same time, their most powerful weapon. And when they realized they couldn't decipher them from a distance, they understood they'd need to face their presence head-on. After years of frustrated surveillance, the moment they'd been delaying arrived. There were no more doubts, no more analyses to make. The only way to understand the chosen one was to meet them, but not as one meets an enemy for interrogation, rather as someone who, even reluctantly, must acknowledge authority. They approached cautiously, expecting resistance or pride. Instead, they were met with the same serenity they displayed in any situation. There was no arrogance, only the calm confidence of someone who knows their worth doesn't depend on human approval. This dismantled any intimidation protocol they'd planned. The silence in that encounter spoke louder than words. It wasn't fear or submission, it was self-mastery. They didn't need to explain themselves, their presence was the answer. It was like standing before a lighthouse. You don't question the light, you simply recognize it guides. Those who came to measure their strength realized they were facing something that couldn't be captured in reports. It was a force not imposed by brute power, but by the weight of the truth they carried. And truth doesn't negotiate, doesn't corrupt, and above all, doesn't fade. This encounter changed the course of things. It was no longer about observing or containing. Now there was a mix of respect and awe. Not because they sought to be feared, but because they carried a silent authority that can't be manufactured. And so, what began as surveillance gave birth to the conviction that their mission wasn't to be watched but to be followed. The weight of the journey finally found its meaning. Everything that had been observed, measured, and tested wasn't to expose weaknesses, but to confirm they were ready. They weren't chosen by chance. They were forged. And now the mission was no longer to survive under watchful eyes, but to rise and become a reference for others fighting the same silent battle. They understood they weren't shaped to be kept in secret. The same light that unsettled their observers was meant to be shared with those who don't yet know they're also chosen. This realization didn't fill them with pride, but with responsibility. It was no longer about being seen, but about being a lighthouse. The final call wasn't to destroy systems, but to activate people, to inspire others to recognize their own strength and the faith that sustains them. It's like lighting a candle in a dark room. One flame can ignite many others until the darkness is dispelled. They knew that every word, every gesture, and even their silence now carried weight. This transition wouldn't happen with announcements or public celebrations. The movement would be organic, silent but profound. Those who resonated with their frequency would naturally draw near, like rivers flowing to the sea. And when these connections happened, the impact would be irreversible. They weren't born to live in the shadow of what the world allowed, but to carry a calling that doesn't depend on human permission. When God confirms, no opposing force can stop it. What was once surveillance now turned into reverence, and this shift in stance paved the way for something far greater. The time isn't to wait, but to act. Because when the moment arrives, the chosen one doesn't ask for permission. They simply take their place, knowing their mission has already begun. To show you've made it this far, comment below this video with the keyword of the day: frequency. This word captures the essence of everything we've discussed, the invisible vibration that changes environments, transforms people, and destabilizes systems without a single shout. Share this video with anyone you know who's also been watched and never understood, so they can realize they're not alone on this journey. And now tell me, have you noticed clear signs that you're being prepared for something greater? Have you felt that even in the worst moments, there was a purpose behind every step? Share your story in the comments, and let's build a network of connection among those who carry this mark. Click the video on your screen now to discover how to know yourself even more deeply and live consciously in the role you were born to fulfill.